These are historically construed, and therefore the historical perspective is needed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maija-Stina. And next speaker will be Sari Kivistö. And she has described her interdisciplinary position or interdisciplinary space as follows. I quote, 400 years old Latin treatises meet their first female reader and a literary scholar. I think that's wonderful. And Sari also pointed out that she doesn't really have academic passions, but that these treatises, they are, in her mind, interesting. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anne-Birgitta. Dear guests, in his Latin satire on the art of becoming rich and wealthy, which was addressed to German philosophers, Johann Balthasar Schupp, a pastor and professor of eloquence from the 17th century University of Marburg, described a dream which he had seen. He had dreamed that Francis Bacon had returned to Europe to enlist laborers and professional men for his ideal state. In the dream, Bacon had advised all Germans to abandon their country and to establish with him a Collegium, an ideal state for which he now recruited men who might contribute in some way to the formation of such a state, including a minister, a merchant, a peasant, and a teacher. The group of potential candidates then proceeded to a mineral spring where they started a discussion on the benefits of different sciences. Each of the participants presented some moral or practical advice for bettering conditions in the state from their perspectives, and they also presented the disadvantages of traditional learning. Finally, a voice was heard which sang that those who look for wealth are building on ice, and that at that moment a crowing cock awakened the dreaming author. Schupp and other critics of traditional university learning asked whether theoretical knowledge was completely incompatible with useful outcomes. Theoretical knowledge supported by the elite was contrasted with the practical arts of merchants, artisans, and peasants. In his satires, Schupp reminded his readers that a shoemaker had learned only one art, but it enabled him to support himself without begging, and that rather than devoting themselves to the old humanistic disciplines, which had emphasized verbal and rhetorical virtuosity, scholars should spend more time studying geography, history, mathematics, mechanics, and the natural sciences. Mathematics was necessary for commercial activities, and artisan skills benefited society more than logic and grammar. Schupp saw the peasant, like the simple artisan, as the possessor of practical knowledge, which the theorizing university professor of his day lacked. This criticism was indicative of the changing conditions in early modern academia. Although university learning was not primarily directed at public or practical use, there were, much like today, increasing demands for university specialists to be more productive and to use their skills to contribute to the general welfare, instead of allowing them to gather dust in the classrooms. Usefulness was one of the key sensibilities that informed ideas about the value of knowledge. Interestingly, the pressure on universities to demonstrate their social usefulness was particularly strong in those universities in which the influence of pietism was the strongest. My own research focuses on scholarly vices and conflicting disciplines in the early modern university, especially in Germany, but also in Scandinavia. Works on scholarly envy, pride, laziness, the desire for superiority, bad manners, and other vices kept the presses running at the Protestant universities of Leipzig, Jena, Königsberg, as well as further north, especially in the first 2 decades of the 18th century. And it's interesting to observe how the early modern debates on old and new knowledge also arose from the different notions of useful learning. Much criticism was directed against the old-fashioned generation of humanistic scholars, which consisted of rudely behaving and doctrinally narrow schoolmen who preferred to devote their lives to reading in the privacy of their studies and parading their traditional learning based on the Greek and Roman classics. The older generation also included misanthropes, smoking addicts, and men who refused to communicate their knowledge to the public. One of the common complaints was that sciences led to nothing but quarrels on useless issues, such as the question of what was God doing before creating the earth, or whether there were large cities before the Great Flood, the answer of which depended on how the word city was defined and whether it referred to the population size of a human community or to the idea of community in general. Disagreements were endless, since words were ambiguous. These characteristics contrasted strikingly with the early Enlightenment ideals of communicability and sociability. I just wanted to say that I do have passions. I do have academic passions, but not passions.
So perfect, our fellows. And our next speaker is Nikolai Kloposov. And he says that for him the main interdisciplinary encounter has been with the cognitive sciences, which have allowed him to give a cognitive turn to the history of concepts and history of ideas.